Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Noelle, and today we are going to talk about what you need to think about before signing up for a race. So it is the year 2022. The pandemic is still ongoing, but we're kind of approaching more normalcy in many aspects of life, and that includes mass participation events. Now, I am somebody who used to participate in so many races: triathlon, marathon, bike races, what have you. But that was in the before times. In these times, there are a few more things that you have to consider before actually signing up for a race. And I wanted to talk with you guys a little bit about that because I know runners and triathletes, we are so gung ho about signing up for races that we usually just close our eyes and click on that register button without thinking of the implications of that registration. While I did catch a few races that went on sometime late last year, they were mostly invitational, and I guess they were like trial balloons or tests for actually holding races. The race that comes to memory as the first race that's held during this pandemic is the National Age Group Triathlon in Subic, which was held 2 weeks ago. And I have a number of friends who attended there and they raced, and they were really happy about being able to race once again for the first time in 2 years. I think that's going to be the blueprint of how races are going to be held moving forward during this time when we're still dealing with the threat of COVID 19. Go Clark, which is the events organizing company that manages many of the events in Clark, in Pampanga, they announced a whole slate of races that are going to be held throughout this year. And of course, me as a fan of Go Clark, and they're my friends too, and I love their races, I was so tempted to say, put my hand up and say, I'm signing up for these races once you open the registration. Coming up also next month is Ironman Philippines, which many thought would be postponed, but surprise, surprise, it's pulling through. And then there's also Tin Man. A lot of people signed up to Tin Man because they thought that Iron Man wasn't pushing through, and then it did. So there are a number of them who are signed up for an Iron Man and then half Iron Man. Also, Sunrise Events announced that they're bringing over the Rock and Roll Marathon series to the Philippines, and they opened registration on February 14. So, yes, racing is coming back, but here's what you need to consider before actually signing up for any of these races. First of all is fitness. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of us during this pandemic, we weren't really training towards anything. We were just maintaining fitness. So you have to consider whether the amount of time between when you sign up and the race is actually occurring is the appropriate amount of time for you to get your body prepared for the rigors of that race. Obviously, if you're signing up for a 5K and you've been running 3 times a week for the past 2 years, that's not going to be a problem. But I would be concerned if you signed up for a marathon 4 weeks before it actually happened. So, yes, you do need to give yourself time to get ready. Another thing to consider is, do you have access to the training venues that you need to get ready? And this applies to triathletes because a lot of our pools were open and shut throughout this period, and that didn't really lend any consistency to training. So your swim split, your ability to handle open water might be affected by this. A number of swim coaches have opened open water swimming clinics at different resorts. These are weekend clinics that you can sign up to. But yes, again, yeah, you have to think about your access to your training and whether you're able to complete the training. Another thing to consider is cost. Another cost that's been imposed on racing, as far as the races that I know already have moved forward, is the cost of COVID 19 RT PCR tests. The NEGT required three things. They required a vaccination certificate, a medical certificate, and an RT-PCR result from the last 48 hours. I know that vaccinations are free, so if you haven't gotten vaccinated yet, this is your sign to go get your vaccine. Medical certificates, if you have a friend who's a doctor and who's willing to give you one for free, then great. But otherwise, there is an associated cost to getting a medical certificate. And lastly, RT-PCR tests aren't cheap here in the Philippines. They're not free either. For those of you overseas who think, oh, you can just get a PCR test and it's free. No. A PCR test costs roughly around $50, 2,500 pesos. I know there are ones that are cheaper that dip below 2,000 pesos. There's an average about 2,300. The drive-through that I've booked for an upcoming trip is around 2,700 pesos. The ones that are cheaper aren't even guaranteed to give you a result within 48 hours. So, yes, that is an expense that you will have to compute and include in the things that you need to pay for when you're going to go race. Initially, I think our TRAP, the Triathlon Association of the Philippines, they're the ones currently holding the races and coming up with the protocols for these. They were basing it off of the World Triathlon Protocol, which is like there was a mandatory period of quarantine at the venue, and then you couldn't really go out, and then you had to take your test there, I think. Thankfully, that's no longer the case. You can arrive to the venue the night before. You just have to present your PCR result to them when you claim your race kit. I think that's the protocol. The thing is, elsewhere in the world, that isn't the case. You're not required to present a negative test result to race. And I think it's because this is an IATF requirement, the Interagency Task Force Against COVID-19. So these are the guys that determine our alert level and what we're allowed to do at these alert levels. And I guess as part of the agreement to be able to hold mass participation races, they said you have to require your participants to present PCR results. Other races around the world were able to hold their events, and it's proven that there were no chains of transmission established during these events. Like, for instance, Challenge Roth, which happened last year around September, they required their participants to present either a vaccination certificate or a negative test result. And yeah, nobody got sick then. Obviously, with Omicron, that might change the calculus a little bit there. And I'm certainly not one to say that the IATF shouldn't require PCR test results. But I am concerned mostly that the requirement for RT-PCR test results prior to racing can lock out a significant number of the population that participates in mass participation. The races aren't cheap either. Lastly, you have to consider your level of comfort. After all, this is a pandemic, and every activity that you do outside of the house carries with it a level of risk. Like, if I stay at home with my parents who also stay at home most of the time, that's low risk, right? But if I had to go to work every day, that would increase their risk of getting COVID-19. Getting my hair done, which you can see I did, that was also a little bit greater risk than I usually take on every day. But I had my protective equipment on, like my mask. I never took it off. I went to a reputable salon which tests their attendants regularly and also has them vaccinated. And so I believe that was an acceptable level of risk. Now, for mass participation, for racing, you have to decide what's an acceptable level of risk for you as well. Obviously, being outdoors amongst vaccinated people who present an RT-PCR negative, that's pretty low risk. And so if you're comfortable with everything that entails, then go ahead and sign up for the race. For me, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to see how things go. I'm never an early adopter to these things. I just want to see how these races are held, and so that when I finally sign up for a race, everything's all ironed out, all the procedures and everything. And there's another thing there, because even though it's pretty stable here in the Philippines, the level of community infection, that could still potentially change in the near and far future. So, if you're signing up to a race, you have to assume the risk that these races might not push forward, or they might push forward but in a different form than what you originally signed up for. That's what you need to consider before signing up for a race this year. I'm not one to tell you don't sign up. Last year I said I wasn't signing up. This year I'm taking a wait and see. I'm very positive that this could be a thing towards the second half of the year for me. And so I have to start building up my base fitness as well, because I don't want to have to catch up when I do decide to go race again. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching and for listening to me blabber on. If you like this video, if you believe it informed you or it was entertaining, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!